In a jaw-dropping moment inside a federal courtroom, Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett confronted Vice President JD Vance with accusations that could change the course of history. But then, everything shifted. In a stunning twist, Vance revealed a truth so powerful, it silenced the room and turned the tide of public opinion across the nation. What happened next left everyone speechless. The gavel struck the bench with a sharp crack. The room froze. Justice Barrett sat upright, her gaze fixed on JD Vance, who had just stepped into the courtroom. Flashbulbs fired. Whispers filled the air. The nation had been watching for days, but no one expected this. Barrett, known for her composure, looked visibly shaken. She did something rare, she stood. Her voice wavered slightly as she broke protocol. "Vice President Vance," she said, "this court is now in possession of documents indicating you knowingly withheld classified intelligence." Gasps rippled through the room. Reporters dropped their pens. In the gallery, President Trump watched silently. But Vance didn't flinch. His hands remained calmly folded. He looked down, still and composed, the kind of calm that says, "I know something you don't." Then, he raised his eyes. They didn't show fear, only sorrow. "Your Honor," he said softly, "if I answer your charge truthfully, it won't just change this trial. It will change this country." The room held its breath. And just like that, America leaned in. JD Vance didn't speak right away. He reached slowly into his coat pocket and pulled out a weathered, folded letter. The edges were yellowed, worn with time, like it had spent years forgotten in an old drawer. "This," he said, his voice catching, "was written by a mother who died believing justice had forgotten her." A tear slipped down the cheek of a woman in the gallery. Barrett blinked, caught off guard. Her name was Mrs. Lena Harris. She lived in southern Ohio. She lost her son, Private Matthew Harris, in what the government called a classified operation failure. He paused. But it wasn't a failure. It was a cover-up, a lie. His eyes locked on Barrett. "A lie signed by you." Barrett turned pale. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. "I know because I received the redacted file by mistake," JD continued. "I didn't keep it to protect myself, I kept it because it was the last shred of truth that woman had." He stepped forward and placed the letter on the bench, delicately, like something sacred. "Before she died last year, Mrs. Harris begged me to find out who was responsible. I did." The room remained deathly still. From the back, someone whispered, "Oh my God." Justice Barrett took a breath. Her hands trembled, but she clenched them to keep control. She glanced between the letter, the cameras, and JD Vance. "This is absurd," she said, her voice tightening. "Private military records are sealed for a reason. You're twisting the truth." But JD wasn't finished. He moved to the evidence table, opening a slim leather folder. "I didn't come here to destroy anyone," he said. "But I won't stand silent while the truth is buried beneath titles and prestige." From the folder, he pulled out a grainy photograph. The image wasn't clear, but the face was unmistakable, Justice Amy Coney Barrett standing next to a private contractor, the same one listed in the classified cover-up. "This man was paid $3.2 million in hush money," Vance said, "through a fund you authorized. Do you deny knowing him?" Barrett's lips moved, but no words came. The jury stirred. From their box, someone whispered, "She knows." JD's eyes never left hers. "I didn't want this," he said softly. "I admired you." Barrett's voice was barely a whisper. "You don't know what you're doing." Vance didn't hesitate. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm keeping a promise, to a grieving mother." Barrett stared at the photo, her eyes scanning the room, looking for an exit. There wasn't one. JD raised a new document, slowly, deliberately. "This is a copy of a handwritten memo. It was found in the home of a retired intelligence aide who passed away 2 months ago. In it, he names you, Justice Barrett, as the final signatory of a back-channel operation that never went through Congress. He held it toward the cameras. No classified stamp. No redactions. Just ink, and truth. Barrett's jaw tightened. You obtained this illegally. JD stepped forward. I received it from his widow. She begged me to tell the world what her husband died protecting. She gave me this and said, please don't let him be forgotten like the others. From the gallery, an older man began to sob. And that boy, Matthew Harris? JD added. He was 19. In his last letter to his mother, he wrote, if I don't come back, I just want someone to tell the truth. Justice Barrett finally sat down. And for the first time, she looked afraid. Justice Barrett stood behind the bench, her hands gripping the wood tightly. Her voice was firm, but her fingers trembled. You have no authority to initiate a federal investigation, Mr. Vance, she said. This is political theater, nothing more. JD Vance didn't blink. Instead, he calmly walked to the side of the courtroom and played a short audio clip. The voice was unmistakable. It was Justice Barrett. If the mother pushes too hard, she said in the recording, we'll release a statement claiming her son violated protocol. That'll kill the story before it even begins. The courtroom erupted. Reporters gasped. Jurors looked stunned. Barrett went pale. Where did you get that? She demanded. Vance's voice was quiet, but it carried weight. From your former assistant, he replied. She came forward. Said her conscience couldn't carry the burden anymore. A long pause followed. Then JD turned back to the bench. Your Honor, he said, you abused your position to protect a lie. You robbed a grieving family of closure. And now, the American people deserve to know what else you've buried. Barrett didn't respond. She just sat and stared at the floor. Outside the courthouse, crowds were gathering. But it wasn't outrage that brought them, it was hope. JD Vance had just cracked open something far bigger than anyone expected. Just before the court recessed, Vance handed a thick file to the bailiff. It was sealed in a plastic bag labeled Top Secret, declassified by executive order. The presiding judge, a quiet but highly respected federal magistrate, inspected the folder with wide eyes. Where did this come from? He asked. JD stepped forward. From the National Archives. Unsealed this morning by President Trump at my request, under the Fallen Soldier Transparency Act. A new wave of shock swept through the courtroom. Barrett's eyes widened. She knew what was in that file. This folder, Vance said, contains transcripts, covert communication logs, and financial documents showing that Justice Barrett protected a defense contractor from prosecution. In exchange, she received political influence and donations to a non-profit foundation connected to her husband. Barrett stood abruptly. This is political warfare. She snapped. No, ma'am, JD said calmly. This is justice. He turned to the cameras, addressing not just the courtroom, but the country. And to every family who's ever felt ignored by the system that promised to protect them, this is for you. People inside the courtroom wept openly. Outside, veterans gathered, some in uniform, some holding photographs of sons and daughters lost under shadowy circumstances. The nation was waking up. And it was watching. That evening, JD Vance stepped out of the courthouse to make a brief statement. Dozens of microphones pointed toward him. Reporters leaned in, waiting for him to speak about Barrett. But he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he told a story. When I was a boy, he began, I watched my mother cry over a folded flag. Not because she lost someone, but because her best friend did. He paused. She said something that stayed with me ever since. She said, they give us flags when they don't want to give us answers. His voice cracked. He didn't try to hide it. That's why I'm here. Because some answers were buried too deep, and too many people stopped digging. But I didn't. There was no follow-up. No shouting. Just silence. Even the most skeptical reporters were visibly moved. Hundreds of miles away, a mother in Kansas, whose son had died in a classified mission, burst into tears as she watched. "He's fighting for all of us," she whispered to her husband. JD Vance didn't linger. "I didn't come here to win a political battle," he said. "I came to win back trust." Then he turned and walked back into the courthouse. And for the first time in years, America started to believe again. The next morning, court resumed. The nation was glued to their screens. And then, everything changed again. The first witness of the day stepped forward. She was quiet, modestly dressed, in her mid-50s. Her name was Margaret Olson. "My husband," she said, her voice trembling, "was a civilian analyst at the Department of Defense. He died of a heart attack 2 months ago. But before he passed, he told me to give this to someone I could trust." She handed JD Vance a flash drive. On it, surveillance logs. One file stood out. A security video. It showed Justice Barrett sitting in a private D.C. restaurant, speaking with the same defense contractor tied to the Harris cover-up. The audio was clear. "Just make sure that mother never sees the real file," Barrett said. "One headline and I lose everything." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Barrett's face turned ghostly white. Margaret looked directly at JD. "I didn't know who to trust," she said. "But my husband said you were different." JD's voice cracked. "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am." She nodded gently. "He said you'd be the one to do what he couldn't." The courtroom was stunned. Reporters didn't speak. They just wrote, furiously. Across the country, families who had lost loved ones in silence felt something stir. Hope. The judge dimmed the lights. JD Vance stepped forward with composure. "With your permission," he said, "I'd like to play a 1-minute clip from the security footage we received yesterday." The judge nodded. The screen flickered. There, in crystal clarity, sat Justice Barrett, across from the contractor. Their voices were low, but the enhanced audio left no doubt. "Just make sure that mother never gets the real file," Barrett said. "One public headline, and I lose everything." A woman in the front row sobbed. Barrett stood up, shaking. "Objection!" she shouted. "This is taken out of context." But it was too late. The courtroom knew. The country knew. This wasn't politics. This was betrayal. And JD Vance had just done what no one thought possible. He gave a dead mother the voice she had been denied in life. A man rose quietly in the gallery. He wore a worn military jacket, a silver star pinned proudly to his chest. "I served with Matthew Harris," he said, his voice gravelly with emotion. "He died because someone changed the mission plan at the last minute. A change," he added, "we were told came from the court." Justice Barrett's jaw tightened. "I held Matthew's hand as he bled out," the man continued. "He kept whispering, 'Tell my mom I didn't mess up. Tell her it wasn't my fault.'" Soft sobs echoed through the room. Even one of the reporters lowered her camera to wipe away tears. JD Vance approached gently. "Can you confirm," he asked, holding up a document, "that this is the mission order?" The soldier took it, looked down, and his voice broke. "That's it. That's the order that got him killed." Barrett slumped in her chair. The judge looked visibly shaken. Then JD spoke a single line that echoed across the nation that night. "This wasn't an accident. It was a choice." And in that moment, America realized this wasn't just about a courtroom. It was about the soul of the country. That night, JD Vance sat alone in his hotel room. The cameras, the chaos, all of it faded behind him. His phone rang nonstop. But he needed silence. He reached into his bag and pulled out an old Bible, his grandmother's. The same one he carried during his campaign. Inside, between the pages of Psalms, was a photo, a teenage boy in uniform, bright-eyed, smiling, Matthew Harris. JD stared at it, remembering the call from Eleanor Harris months ago. How she sobbed. How she begged. "I know you're not just a politician," she had said. "You're a soldier's son." That still means something. Outside, protesters, supporters, reporters crowded the courthouse. But JD could only think about one thing. "I won't stop until the truth stands," he whispered. Back in the courthouse, Justice Barrett locked herself in chambers. But outside, something had changed. One mother's heartbreak had broken through years of silence. And JD Vance wasn't just vice president anymore. He had become the face of truth. The next morning, as court resumed, JD Vance arrived early. Clutched tightly in his hand was a plain manila envelope. No markings. No label. Only weight. As the courtroom filled, JD stood and walked calmly to the bench. "Your Honor," he said, "before we proceed, I have one last item to submit." Inside the envelope, a signed confession. Handwritten by the very defense contractor connected to the fatal operation. It read, "Justice Barrett told me not to disclose the faulty equipment used in Operation Hollow River. She said it would ruin her confirmation chances." A collective gasp rippled across the room. JD turned to the judge. That equipment had been flagged for failure for months. But corners were cut. To protect someone's political rise. The judge leaned back in disbelief. Barrett's lawyers called for a recess. The judge denied it. "We need transparency, not delay," he said. Barrett sat frozen. Her silence louder than any denial. Outside, flags were lowered at veterans' memorials across the nation. People weren't just mourning a fallen soldier anymore. They were mourning the cost of unchecked ambition. Just before the next recess, a man entered the courtroom, slowly, leaning on a cane. David Harris. Matthew's father. He hadn't spoken publicly since his son's funeral. Grief had stolen his words. But now, with trembling hands, he stood at the witness stand. His eyes met JD's. "My wife asked for the truth," he said. "You gave her that. She died believing no one would listen. But you did." The courtroom remained silent. David turned to Justice Barrett. "When I shook your hand at the awards ceremony, you told me you were proud of my son's sacrifice." He paused, his voice cracking. "But now I know. His death was your cover." Barrett lowered her head. David reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper, his son's final letter. "Dad, if something happens, just know I tried to be brave. I love you and Mom so much." JD Vance wiped away tears. And for a moment, the courtroom wasn't a place of politics. It was sacred. A father. A son. A promise kept. And a country finally listening. After David finished speaking, the room fell still. Even the bailiff quietly wiped his eyes. Then, crack, the judge's gavel slammed down. He looked directly at Justice Barrett. "You have the right to respond to these claims," he said. "But silence will be taken as acceptance." Barrett opened her mouth. But no words came. Only tears. I never meant for anyone to die," she finally whispered. JD stood. "With all due respect," he said, "intentions don't erase consequences. One family's pain shouldn't have been buried to protect your career." The judge nodded solemnly. Then he turned to the room. "This hearing is no longer just about ethics," he said. "It's about the integrity of the highest institutions in our nation. We proceed. No delays." People in the gallery stood, veterans, mothers, students, pastors. Outside, cameras captured thousands gathered peacefully, holding signs, not in protest, but in remembrance. Matthew's life mattered. Truth over power. "Thank you, JD." Just when it felt like the courtroom had seen it all, JD Vance called one final, unexpected witness. A woman stepped forward, hands trembling. No badge. No uniform. But when she spoke, the room listened. My name is Susan Whitaker. I was the nurse on duty at Fort Bright Medical the night Matthew Harris arrived. Barrett suddenly looked up. Panic flickered across her face. Susan's voice cracked. He didn't die instantly. He lived for 27 minutes. And in that time, he kept asking me the same question. She swallowed. Did my mom know I wasn't supposed to be there? The courtroom went still. Susan wiped her eyes. I didn't understand what he meant. Until months later, when I overheard a conversation about a name being switched on the mission roster, JD gently asked, whose name did he replace? Susan turned to Barrett. Your nephew. Gasps filled the room. JD didn't flinch. He simply whispered, so you chose your family over hers. Barrett closed her eyes. And millions watching at home realized, this wasn't just corruption. It was betrayal at the highest level. It had become personal. After Susan Whitaker's revelation, the judge called a brief recess. But JD Vance didn't leave the courtroom. He remained at the witness stand, holding something small in his hands, a letter, neatly folded. This is something I've never read aloud until today, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It was written by Eleanor Harris, Matthew's grandmother, just days before she passed. He unfolded the paper carefully, his hands trembling. To America, he began. You don't know me. But you know people like me? Mothers. Grandmothers. People who've trusted this country with our most precious gift, our children. Tears welled up across the room. Even the judge discreetly wiped his eyes. My grandson believed in this country, JD read. But the country didn't protect him. They used him. And then forgot him. If anyone finds this, please remember one thing, truth is not revenge, it's healing. And healing is all we ever wanted. JD's voice cracked. She ended with this, if you're reading this, I hope you're brave enough to tell the truth, even if it costs you everything. He folded the letter and placed it gently on the table. In that moment, JD wasn't a politician or a vice president. He was just a man keeping a promise. When court resumed, Justice Barrett looked like a different woman. Gone was the confident posture. She stood slowly, pale, hands trembling. She began, her voice breaking. I thought I could live with it. I convinced myself the mission was a success, that the details didn't matter. But they did. Tears streamed down her face. I swapped the names, she confessed. I knew my nephew wasn't trained for that mission. I panicked. I used my clearance to alter the roster. I thought it would be harmless. She paused, sobbing. I didn't know Matthew would be the one to replace him. I told myself I'd fix it later. But then it was too late. And there was too much to lose. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. I am sorry, she whispered. But the truth had already reached the country. Millions of families watched through their tears, wishing someone had spoken up before the damage was done. That afternoon, JD requested one final item be brought into the courtroom. It wasn't a document. It wasn't a recording. It was a wooden kitchen chair, plain, small, and carefully placed next to the witness stand. This, JD said quietly, was Matthew Harris's kitchen chair. His grandmother gave it to me before she passed. She said, he never got the chance to defend himself in a courtroom. So give him his seat. The judge nodded solemnly. And for the rest of the day, every person who testified turned slightly toward that chair. As if Matthew was listening. Barrett couldn't look at it. Every time her eyes met the empty wood, she blinked away tears. JD turned to the cameras. Let this chair remind us that behind every lie is a life that can never be replaced. Across the country, living rooms fell silent. Veterans stood. Grieving families placed hands over their hearts. It wasn't just a chair anymore. It was a symbol of every voice that had been erased. And JD Vance had just made sure one of them would never be forgotten again. As the session neared its end, a young boy stepped nervously into the courtroom. He looked about 11, holding something small in his hands. He walked to the bench and spoke softly. "Can I give this to the Vice President?" JD knelt down, surprised. The boy held out a small military medal, its ribbon frayed. "My dad died in Iraq," he said. "This was his. I watched this trial all week. I wanted you to have it. Because you fought for a soldier when no one else did." JD took the medal as if it were made of glass. "What's your name?" he asked. "Caleb," the boy whispered. JD hugged him, and every camera caught the moment. That night, news stations aired a single image, a grieving boy and a vice president who knelt to honor him. It wasn't staged. It wasn't political. It was real. The next morning, the jury returned early. Tension hung heavy in the air. The foreman stood, voice shaking. "We have reached a decision." The judge nodded. "Please proceed." He turned to Justice Barrett. "We find that while your actions do not constitute a crime under current law, they were morally negligent and politically deceitful. We recommend immediate resignation and full congressional review." Barrett said nothing. She simply nodded. "I understand." Then something unexpected happened. The juror turned to JD Vance. "And to you, Mr. Vice President," he said, "we have nothing to rule, but everything to say. Thank you." The room rose to its feet. The jury. The audience. Even the judge. No applause. Just reverent silence, for the truth. JD didn't smile. He simply looked at the empty chair. And said, "This was never about winning. It was about honoring a promise, to a soldier, a mother, a family, and a nation that deserved the truth." That evening, as the sun set over Washington, D.C., a sealed envelope arrived at the Capitol. It was hand-delivered by Justice Barrett's assistant. Inside, just 2 lines. "To the people of the United States. I resign from my position as Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. Effective immediately. Amy Coney Barrett." Newsrooms exploded. Social media erupted. But JD didn't celebrate. Instead, he asked reporters for privacy, for the Harris family. "This moment," he said, "belongs to them." Outside the Harris home, strangers left flowers, cards, and candles. One note read simply, "Because of JD, the truth finally won." That night, JD sat in silence, holding Caleb's medal in his hand. "We didn't win," he whispered. "We just made it right." The next morning, a classroom in Cincinnati gathered around a screen. Their teacher, Mrs. Henley, had followed the trial all week. She walked to the whiteboard and wrote one word in large, careful letters, "Honor." "Who can tell me what this means?" she asked. A girl raised her hand. "It means telling the truth. Even when it's hard." "Exactly," Mrs. Henley said, wiping her eyes. "And who showed us that this week?" The class answered in unison. "Vice President Vance." Pinned on the classroom wall, next to the American flag, was a photo of Matthew Harris in uniform. Below it, a handwritten note from the children. "You are not forgotten." When JD Vance saw the clip later that evening, he covered his face with both hands. He didn't cry for politics. He cried because the truth had reached the place that mattered most, the next generation. That night, JD's phone rang. "Mr. Vice President," President Trump's voice came through the line, steady and solemn. "You didn't just expose corruption," he said. "You exposed courage." JD paused. "I wasn't seeking glory," he replied. "Only justice." "I know," Trump said. "But America saw what you did. And they'll never forget it." The president added quietly, "Tomorrow. I want you to deliver a national address. From the Lincoln Memorial. Not as a politician, but as a man who did the right thing." JD was quiet for a moment. "I will," he said. "But only if I can say one name." Trump smiled through the phone. "Let me guess. Matthew Harris," JD said. "And his mother?" The next morning, mist hovered over the reflecting pool in Washington, D.C. JD Vance stepped onto the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, the American flag behind him. He looked out at the crowd, veterans, families, children, and spoke. "6 days ago, I walked into a courtroom to defend myself. But what I uncovered was never about me. It was about all of us." He placed Matthew's photo on the podium. This young man gave everything. For a country that nearly forgot his name. Today, we remember, not because of anger, but because of love. If we're going to heal, we start here, with truth, and with those we've lost. The crowd didn't cheer. Instead, they knelt. Veterans, mothers, children. One by one, they knelt, not in protest, but in honor. And in the front row, little Caleb placed his hand over his heart. JD Vance knelt too. Not as vice president, but as a son, a father, a citizen. That night, back in Ohio, JD stood with David Harris on the family's porch. He placed Caleb's medal beside Matthew's folded flag. "This belongs here," JD whispered. "With those who taught us what honor means." David nodded. "Your son changed this country," JD said. "And you gave him a voice." The neighborhood flickered with candlelight. A sea of stars for a boy who never came home. JD hadn't planned to be a hero. He just refused to break a promise. And in doing so, he didn't just expose corruption. He rewrote what courage looks like. The next morning, Congress passed the Harris Act, mandating full transparency for fallen service members. There was no debate. No opposition. Because JD Vance hadn't just told a story. He sparked a movement. At Arlington Cemetery, a new memorial stood quietly, just a flame behind glass. No statue. No speech. Just 12 words, "To the soldier whose truth was buried." Until one man spoke it. JD lit the flame himself. And finally, he wept. That night, at home with his children, JD hugged them tightly as they ran into his arms. "Welcome home, Daddy," one said, holding a handmade sign. He fell to his knees. "I just wanted to make the world safer for you," he whispered. Later, in the quiet of his room, JD wrote one last letter. Not for the court. Not for the cameras. For the future. Let the story not end with me. Let it begin with every child who believes telling the truth, no matter the cost, is how nations rise. He closed the book. And across America, a soldier was remembered. A system was changed. And the truth finally stood. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel. Share your thoughts in the comments. What part moved you the most? Like and share this with someone who still believes in truth, honor, and courage. Because sometimes, the quietest voices echo the loudest, when the right person chooses to speak. Thank you for watching. We will never forget Matthew Harris.